Hello, everybody. This is Airman Jans with the 97th Air Mobility Wing Command Team, as always, Colonel Baker and Chief Flores. And we are joined here by First Lieutenant Rogers from our mighty 97th LRS. And gentlemen, welcome back to the studio. How are you guys doing?
Thanks for having us. We're doing awesome.
Yeah, we're doing great. Loving the new mics. Loving that they're freshly minted. We still have fresh instructions on how to use them. That's how you know they're new.
Yeah.
Airman Chance is professionalizing this one episode at a time.
Yes.
He's up the game.
Yes,
so
sir.
For our audience out there, this like the feeling that you have right now that you're sitting in the room with us is all due to Airman Jance's ingenuity and resourcefulness.
Appreciate that.
So thanks for that. We're doing great.
Yeah, life's good.
Yeah.
And we've got our Logistics Readiness Squadron Lieutenant Rogers out here with us, which is awesome. It's a great
Very
day.
happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, let's dive right into it. Lieutenant Rogers, can you kind of give us a background where you came from, how you made it into the Air Force life?
All right, sure. So I am a military brat, but I call Virginia home nowadays. I went to school at Boston University and then commissioned out of there, did ROTC. And then my first station was Kadena Air Base, and I was in the LRS there. It's the largest LRS in the Air Force. So I got a great foundation as an LRO and an LT. And then I was lucky to get Altus as my second assignment. And I've been here for almost 2 years now. And in a couple weeks, I'll be heading off to my next assignment at Thule Air Base, Greenland.
You're going to Greenland. Wow, that's incredible. Logistics Readiness Officer,
Yes,
LRO.
Mm-hmm.
What a cool story. Come from Boston. Were you following? I just got to ask. Were you following the NBA Finals?
I had a lot of friends who were posting about it, so I did.
Okay.
Was
By
following,
default?
yes, I was following it via them. But I'm usually a New York sports fan team, sports fan.
So you mentioned you have a lineage, like a military background.
Yeah.
What is it?
So my mom was Air Force, and she retired out of the Pentagon. She was Intel, and then my grandfather was Army and retired out of Fort Eustis. And I have uncle and cousins in the Army and the Navy.
Wow, so rich history.
Yeah.
Rich military history.
Military family. That's cool. Really cool. Yeah. So you had a lot of good role models probably to look up to as you got started. Is it? Do you feel like you were well prepared, and is it everything you expected? So I think, by the way, while you think about that answer, I think it's really cool that we're making our way up the chain, so to speak, and we've got into our company grade officer category here, and it's really cool how this story, I think, is gonna be woven together between where we started here and now up to our first lieutenant that we have, which is cool. So, you feel like you were prepared and ready for your Air Force journey?
I definitely feel like my family has given me a lot of stories and a lot of advice, and then my detachment, I would say, prepared me really well. I had some awesome cadre to thank that brought me up, and then on my first assignment, we had, I think, 13 CGOs in our squadron alone, and so we were always looking out for each other, and so I got a great foundation that way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I was actually going to ask you, with the CGOs, how is it like when you guys are moving from from base to base, the support system, you're leaving one group of CGOs to go to another one. How is that in your life? Does it make it easier to transition?
So I would say growing up as a military brat, where we moved pretty frequently, I think I went to 6 different schools between K through 8th grade. So I was used to, knowing which lunch table to sit at the first day of school. But, the CGOs here at Kadena and then here at Altus have been so welcoming. And it's just, hey, you're new? All right, we're doing this thing. Come with us. And it's like, okay. And all right, there's your friends.
So you think you're growing up as a military child, do you think it helped prepare you for that adaptability? And
Definitely.
being able to roll with the punches?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's, Chief and I, we've got little ones. And so I love to hear those stories. I'm sure it has its challenges as well, too. Like you said, being the new kid to school. How many times did you move? Quite a few, sounded like?
I would say, I think 8 total moves. And then we were fortunate that my mom retired while I was in high school, so I didn't have to change high schools, which was really lucky.
Yeah. But Colonel Baker, with your experience, I don't want to say a long time ago, but a long time ago,
Just say it.
when you were a CGO, can you relate to the lieutenant's kind of feeling of the CGO family?
Yeah, I think one thing this is a good thing to hit on. I think with the officer corps, there is a sense of collegiality that I think that stands the test of time, or at least should stand the test of time. I think it's one of the tenets of good officership is that your teammates around you obviously bring you into the fold at every turn. And I think we have this at every level. I mean, I think airmen have their colleagues that they're tight with, and NCOs and senior NCOs, but also at the officer corps, because the dynamic of a new lieutenant coming into our Air Force is a lot of the preparations they'll have. Certainly they'll have life experiences. They'll have some of their academic experiences, but they're not going to have that deep military operational experience to lean on. So they're going to have that network of collegial environment around them of their CGOs, and then of course they're going to have to find that senior NCO mentor and connect there and make sure that they're getting that credibility while they're learning and getting their feet underneath them.
So we didn't clarify when you mentioned your mom and your grandpa, and your uncle. Were they enlisted or officers?
They were officers.
Okay.
Yeah, and so as you came up, I mean, were they your role models? And
I would definitely say my mom is my biggest role model.
You want to give her a shout out? This is part of the thing.
Yeah, I guess shout out to my mom.
What's your name?
Well, yeah.
Donna. She has always been the person who gives me advice, even when I'm just trying to vent to her, and it's like, I just had a bad day. I really don't need advice of how I could have handled that situation better, but she's always there for me and always has my back. So
that's awesome.
Well, shout out to Miss Donna.
Yeah, hey Donna, if you're listening, if and when you pull us up on the debrief episode number 5,
Yep.
Thanks for growing a great Air Force officer. We're excited to have you on episode 5, so that's cool.
Hey man, so you could just Kadena right off the bat. That is a busy base. I think it's population-wise the largest Air Force base in our inventory. So, did you do the same job at both locations?
So I was an LRO at both here and there. I started out as a ground transportation OIC, and so my first section, like the first day in the Air Force, was 140 people. So that was great. I had a senior master sergeant in my section alone, and that was just such a great basis to enter the Air Force in. And then I moved over to be a fuels operation OIC as well. And then I came here and I was the deployment and distribution flight commander, and now I'm the aerial operations flight commander. So.
Okay, so what would you say is one of the biggest lessons you learned from Kadena that you brought here and were able to implement right away? Leadership or management? Preferably leadership, so our listeners can relate a little better.
I'd say that's a tough question, but I think I learned right off the bat task management. With Kadena, it's so go that you have to take care of the task then and there, because you don't know if you're going to be hit with hey, we got to deal with this more pressing situation later. And then leadership, I learned, I got a great front row seat on how to mentor and develop airmen, especially at like 140 at a time. That was a lot. But to see my seniors counsel NCOs of, hey, this is what you need to be doing, and then coming to Altus, I was able to ask those questions of my senior NCOs that I then rated on as a flight commander. Hey, what are we doing for these NCOs? What are we doing for our airmen to develop them? So.
You're paying it forward, applying those lessons that you learned there, which is phenomenal. Exactly.
I'd say she's paying it forward tenfold, because one thing we haven't mentioned is that you were just recently our CGOC president.
Yes, sir.
And we talk about historic and first of its kind Officer Leadership Academy.
Yeah.
That was brought yours I would give it to the senior NCOs. It was originally Air Power Leadership Academy, but y'all took it and made it your own, and it was very successful. I would say out of all of our courses that we have proliferated here, that was the one that's been probably the most successful as far as the feedback that I saw at the graduations.
Yeah, really grassroots, and your leadership on the Company Grade Officer Council as the president made a huge difference, and I agree with Chief on that. I think it is one of the most high value, high return on investment professional developments that we have, and it was pretty awesome to see you lead, right out of the gate and pay it forward, pay back.
That's great. Yeah. I feel like I learned so much every single week, not only from the mentors but also the students, and I felt like every week I would leave the chapel classroom and be like, oh, I feel replued. So.
Perfect. Yeah, that's important.
What really made it a great course is that we had some officers there. They were rated. I'll just throw it out there, and they were very frank and said, I really didn't want to come. I was well told to do the course, but on graduation night, they were probably the most invested.
Yeah.
And their last task was to brief their leadership philosophy, and I know two of them specifically came afterwards and said, our folks need this. Our officers at this level, the CGO level, to be able to come up with that was pretty amazing. And it kind of sets the tone for the rest of their career, regardless of what they do, whether it's do their 4 to 10 years or continue down making a military career. They said that was a great way to do it, and perhaps we don't do that enough with some folks here.
Yeah. It's that, it's that conversation about, and part of that is the art of leadership. It's coaching. It's trying to find that space where, we always want to be sensitive with our team's time, but we also want to find those opportunities to grow. And sometimes folks don't know that they need to be grown in certain ways. And when it's something like that, which is grassroots, in the case of the Officer Leadership Academy, and you take a look at the agenda that you built and the curriculum that you built for it, and it's super high protein stuff, leading in the gray, making the hard call, those kind of things are things that really build some skill sets in our officer corps. So, and I agree with Chief. What he's talking about there is sometimes, folks, we need that nudge for the right things. And when you nudge somebody into growth, the way a coach gets folks ready through hard practice and through sometimes things that may feel inconvenient at the time, but at the end of the day, they pay huge dividends. And I think it's a case of getting it right on that. So I agree with the Chief.
And I think what the support officers learned from the rated officers in the room was equally as valuable. I don't think we necessarily understood what a CGO pilot does, at least at Altus, and hearing their perspective of like, okay, now we understand why you necessarily don't have the time to always interact with the CGOC at a usual base, is because you're on the road so much flying. And so that was really eye-opening to hear their perspective as well.
Yeah, and then I think the conversation really gets to progress, which is, well, what space can we interact in? And how do we make this valuable for each? And you're going to find, and Chief and I talk about this all the time, and maybe you've seen it and love to hear your thoughts, but that ability to interact, cross-function, only becomes more important the more responsibility you have and the more senior you are. So it is a critical skill. And so learning, how to figure out those contact points and how to communicate between the different functions is crucial. And so that alone and of itself, what you're hitting on there is a big takeaway and a positive return on investment for the program.
Yeah, chipped away. I would say the biggest divide in our Air Force is probably the rated community, CGO rated community with the support community. And it's not like they don't want to be around each other. They're just fulfilling different mission sets. There are different level of learning. CGOs could be a flight commander, or they could be a co-pilot that's barely learning their craft, and that takes a lot of time and effort on that side of the house. But the fact that we did OLA here helped really chip away at that, and really get them to where they're at, get them talking. And
yeah,
I know being an ops group, coming from an MSG, That's the biggest difference I saw. And I saw they want to be invested, but when I talked to the rated folks, they say, I guess because we're surrounded by 100 other flying officers, we never really see the need to go over there where y'all are on an island sometimes, where it's you and, like you said, 100 plus enlisted airmen, and they look at you for leadership and guidance, while you also lean heavily on your enlisted.
Yeah,
so, interesting thing.
It really is. I think what you find is there's more commonalities than you think, and like Chief said, that perceived divide is really not. It's not as wide as you think. Once you actually, like we said, find that space to figure out how to connect and how to communicate. Certainly, there's differences in the functions, and that's why we have functions. But I think the fundamentals of leadership that you're going to find are universal in many ways. Sometimes you have to apply a functional skill set, but the actual mechanics of leadership are, I would offer, they're universal to a pretty high degree. And so, that's what you'll find too, which is cool.
Yeah, it was really interesting because OLA was so discussion based to hear, a young second lieutenant, hey, I had this problem at work this week, and to hear, a pilot give their perspective on how they would solve it, and to hear maybe an OSS flight commander how they would solve it, and they're from large flights. So it was really interesting to see how they would take on that situation and that challenge, and you learn from that. And I took away a lot of good things from
and I think on the culmination, where that really became evident is where we saw the leadership philosophies, and so Chief and I got to sit in on all of the graduates' leadership philosophies. That was the culmination of the Leadership Academy, and they were all phenomenal. And the level of thought that went into it was amazing. But on the whole, they weren't that far apart, and so different people had different takes based on their personality, based on their different life experiences, but you find that the fundamentals were pretty closely aligned, which I think brings it all kind of full circle on that. Just fun. That was a fun engagement. And by the way, Chief, I am not apologetic at all, and I think it's a great thing that the genesis of that came from our enlisted corps, came from our senior NCOs who, through the Air Power Leadership Academy, developed the bones of it through their professional development, and it was a great collaboration with the Company Grade Officer Council to develop an officer version, and we can and should do that. That crosstalk goes both ways and really powerful, and I think that was part of the key getting it right.
Absolutely. No, that was good. So I got to ask, ma'am, there's so many facets of what makes being a leader in the Air Force such a fulfilling job. In your career, what has been one of the moments that made you realize, like, wow, this is why it's amazing to serve? Whether it's helping somebody out or getting the mission done when it looked maybe like it wasn't going to happen, or just some other kind of thing that to me, those are moments that just reaffirm our oath or of service to our country.
I would say I can't think of one specific moment. It's several moments that have happened throughout my career, and I would say the first time I was asked to do a reenlistment, like that was probably one of the
Colonel Baker's raising his hand over here in victory.
one of the most exciting moments for me as a lieutenant, to be asked to do that, because to me it's an honor. Like, you enlisted could choose any officer that they wanted to, or technically not at all, and they asked me to do it, and so that was really impactful to me. And then getting to go to ALS graduations, I love going to my airmen's graduations or being invited to go, because that is the first time in the Air Force that they are graduating from a professional military education course, and I know how much hard work that they had to put into that, and seeing how they've changed over those 6-ish weeks, I think, and what they're ready to bring back to the shop, and what they're ready to change, and the airmen that they're ready to lead. It's really inspiring to watch that. So I love getting to go to those events and getting to do re-enlistments.
So your first re-enlistment, did you memorize it from the get-go, or did you have to use it?
100%. I wasn't gonna read off the card.
Yeah.
You know, sir, we underestimate how powerful re-enlistments really are. I mean, you talk about people join initially. A lot of people, I would dare say, don't really know what they're getting into, and they commit anywhere from 4 to 6 years on the enlisted side.
Mm-hmm.
But we underestimate how powerful re-enlisting means that good, bad, ugly, I understand it, and I'm willing to commit myself and my family to the institution for another, potentially your life. And I agree, the fact that when our enlisted ask a specific officer to do them that honor along with their family, I mean, I don't think, there's very few things that are more honorable and powerful than that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have any, and I agree with that, because fundamentally what you're talking about is that's growing airmen, between ALS and the re-enlistment. You're seeing an airman grow, you're seeing them recommit, which is really cool. And from your perspective, in terms of memorable ones for you or people you've asked, what's the symbolism, you hit on a little bit, but some of those same things from y'all's perspective when you've hit re-enlistments?
Well, I've had two. I think I always talk about one. Shortly after 15 June 2007 in Iraq, my flight commander then, a captain, Captain Jason Daniel, he re-enlisted me on melted engine block. That was an IED attack a few months prior, which was awesome. And then frankly, I've had CGOs re-enlist me the entire way. Some of them have been big. Some of them have been, let's grab a little flag from your uniform as the background and let's go in this room and re-enlist me on the spot. But they were all, I think they were purposeful for that officer to make sure that they realized what was at stake. And I had one that got into a little bit of trouble and bounced back, and I was so moved by how much he owned his transgression that he came to me for counseling, and I was able to tell my survival story, but also how I've had CGOs re-enlist me and how I wanted him to do it in front of a bunch of CGOs as well over at Mildenhall. So that's a pretty powerful moment too. Well.
It's a really powerful moment, and I think to your point, I think we undervalue the symbology and the importance of it's easy to normalize those to a way where they become routine, but I think the conversation we're having, and I agree with all y'all, I think they're extremely important. I think the fact that Lieutenant Rogers takes time to memorize it, which I do as well, that says something. I think that's your skin in the game, and you taking the time to put it to memory sends a message, and it shows that you care. But it also, to what we're saying here, I think it adds a degree of it adds a degree of importance and demonstrates that you care.
And I noticed that when you mentioned your two powerful moments, it's all about your airmen. That was very evident. It wasn't about how you won an award or got recognized for doing a great job. It was all how you gave back to your airmen. And as a chief, the fact that it's enlisted airmen, even more awesome, I think. So it's pretty cool to hear you share.
Well, Chief, I'm an LRO. I've been leading airmen. I feel like if it's not about them, then I really shouldn't be in. There's so few times where I'm just going to be in charge of myself and myself only. I usually will be in a position where I'm responsible for airmen, and so their successes have always been my successes.
Yeah, a lot of times, aside from the big maintenance bases, the LRS is one of the bigger, if not the biggest, squadrons across the installation. So yeah, it comes with a big responsibility in terms of numbers of leadership and breadth of leadership. Pretty impressive and cool. Did you want to be a loggy from the very beginning, by the way?
I studied operations management in college, so yes, I definitely wanted that as one of my top choices, so that I could use my degree. So
that's awesome. Well, when you look at if you look at the most recent case of what's going on in Ukraine and some of Russia's challenges there logistically, has proven that in terms of the ability to project power and for logistics and our business, obviously air mobility, that is the enabler for our forces to fight forward. And I think it's pretty evident that and the way that conflict's playing out just underscores the importance of logistics overall. And so that is that's your bread and butter. And I think it's really cool that you have the touch point here at Mobility's hometown to get a feel for the heavy lift side and the air refueling side of things to see how that works. And so
yeah, it was definitely proud as a logistician to see on a world stage how
Do you remember
important.
what General Blackjack Pershing said about logistics?
No.
So he was the commander of our doughboys in World War One. He said the infantry wins battles, logistics win wars. So that was pretty cool.
absolutely. And that this comes back to a conversation about the highly professionalized logistics force that we have with our loggies and LROs and everybody in the community. It's great to hear you get it, and that passion for what you wanted to do and applying those skill sets you had, I think is good too. And so I think whoever had that formative, you already gave your shout out
Yes.
to Mom and everybody else, but it's great to see it all culminate.
And I think it was also great because it showed to our young airmen who've only known Altus and the training mission here, hey, your job is important and there's a reason why we're doing it. This is what happens if we don't do it right.
Yeah, I was just making this case today, LT, about how I'm trying to move the team off of saying it's just training. I think when we say it's just training, we really have a way of minimizing the importance of what we do. I think when people say that, I don't begrudge, I think, where they're coming from, which is what they're trying to have is a risk conversation. They're trying to couch the risk. And certainly in the environment we operate, we look at the risk to mission and force a little differently than we do to somebody who's at a forward operating base, right? That is a completely fair discussion. But I think when I hear it's just training, that's not the essence of what they're trying to say. And when you look at any high-performing organization, it's actually the training pipeline that is the seed and is the foundation for all of that. And with an operation like we have, which because you're at the pointy end of this operation, 70% of air mobility forces, any impact to that training pipeline is going to have cascading effects across our system. So that's something that I'm particularly passionate about, that I've been kind of having a lot of discussions about lately, and you hit on it. So I appreciate you bringing that up. It's good. And understanding that, and I'm sure that translates out to your airmen in the field, which is cool.
All right. I know we're about to be. All right, Lieutenant Rogers.
Do you want? We've talked about the cup every single time.
It's always here. I've always got my notes. I'm always prepared for when you gentlemen show up.
You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, you're right.
You actually have the hardest job.
Oh my gosh! But one question that I ask throughout every podcast is what really motivates you, and I feel like we've touched on this. But if there's something specific, that gets you out of bed every morning. I don't know if you're part of the 5 a.m. club, but like Chief over here, but but if there's something that gets you out of bed every day that motivates you, what is that?
I would say I'm most motivated when I'm able to advocate a new opportunity for my airmen. There are so many things out there for my airmen to learn or experience, and so when I'm able to say, hey, I think we should do this, it will be beneficial for XYZ reason, can we go ahead and try it? And then when the boss says, yeah, go ahead, and they come back and they're like, oh, we experienced all these cool things we never knew, we didn't know how we didn't know all about this side of the Air Force or the Army. It's really gratifying to have them experience that.
And one question I wanted to go back to, we had mentioned CGOs, officers in general, and their relationships with their senior NCOs and their NCOs. I wanted to ask you, how does that relationship with your senior NCOs and your NCOs, how does that impact accomplishing the mission?
I would say it's everything. Without a good relationship, a strong relationship with my senior NCOs and my NCOs, nothing would get done. Or the mission would get done because they don't necessarily always need a flight commander to get the mission done. I'm not out there pushing pallets or turning wrenches every day. But to have a great trusting relationship with my senior NCOs has always been really important. I think they say that from day one in ROTC. Find a good senior NCO and that's how you learn your first couple years. And I've been blessed with some awesome senior NCOs and chiefs. And
have you ever had a challenging relationship with a senior NCO?
I would say I've had some where we have very different takes on how we approach leadership, but overall the goal is we both have the goal of, hey, we want to take care of our airmen, get the mission done, and make sure everybody is safe and trained. It was just sometimes how we wanted to get at that was different, but I think over time it just took time of, hey, this is how, hey, I'm going to default to your SME expertise, because as a logistics readiness officer, I will never be a subject matter expert in any flight that I go into. So I rely on, hey, when the senior NCO says, this is what I think is best, I say, okay, that makes sense. Let's go with that. Or there are times where I'm like, I will question and say, hey, can we attack it from this angle? What will it hurt us if we do it this way? And luckily I've had some great senior NCOs that say, it's maybe not the way it's always been done, but I'll let you try it. And they're willing to let me have these different opportunities.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think they supported you in those times? Other than obviously you outrank them.
They were all learning opportunities. I would say not all of those, hey, I want to have an idea, let's try this, were successful. And I would go back and say, all right, I think we should keep it the way it was, or I think we should go the way you said it was. And they're like, yep, but I got to learn and I got to try. And so I'm always grateful for that.
Yeah, I would say perhaps they trusted you. We always talk about points of friction. And I tell people, what are you doing in that 99% of time when there's no friction? Hopefully you're cultivating relationships based on trust. Mm-hmm. Like Colonel Baker likes to say, putting the shield down so they get to know you. There's a lot, building a team and getting to know them as well and being vulnerable. But it sounds like you did all that, and why they were willing to have your back and share that risk with you when it comes to that.
Yeah, sounds like trust to me. That's what trust sounds like. Willing to try something different. It's in the approach. We talk about this a lot. There's in the business that we do, there's certainly a time and a place for the go do, but like Chief said, most of the time, it's a conversation about how do we do this together, and how do we grow in the process, and how can we look at this from an approach that makes sense and do it collaboratively, without having to use the hard power to get things done. And so, again, when needed, of course, time and a place for that. But trust looks like, how do we do it in a collaborative way, and we reserve the hard power, or we just need to go do for the times that are time sensitive, yes, or they're urgent, or they just have to be done now. So it's a great conversation. We could go so far down this rabbit hole because I love talking about this. But you hit on some good stuff there, Airman Jansen. And what do you look for from an airman's perspective? What do you look for in an officer, in a lieutenant? So what do you look to see, right away? Can you talk us through kind of how that goes? Let's say new lieutenant shows up. What are you looking for?
So, and right away I can go back to Lieutenant Bowles. Shout out Lieutenant Bowles, we miss you. And I can go to Lieutenant Silver, are my two officers that I've had the opportunity to work directly under. And I think the biggest thing, and this goes for all of my leaders, including my senior NCOs, is just their support. Whether it's something, if there's a problem in the office, they're there to be mediators and a non-biased opinion. When it comes to our products, if we have ideas, I like to have constructive feedback, not not necessarily negative feedback. It's constructive, so that I can take that feedback and learn from it, and that's the best way I personally learn, and this, like I said, this comes from my lieutenants as well as my senior NCOs, and I think that's probably the top thing I look for from my leadership is their support and their constructive feedback.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome to hear from your perspective. I think it's helpful. I was thinking while you were talking about that, I think one of the challenges of being a lieutenant, and LT, please correct me to 100% or provide your current perspective. I think one of the challenges is there's great pressure on a lieutenant to produce, and generally I remember having a feeling of there's something to prove. Now that has served me well from time to time. That's one of the things where I look back, what'd you get right, what'd you get wrong as a young lieutenant. I think I probably put too much pressure on myself when I actually look back on it in hindsight. But I think that is something that, a lieutenant has a unique pressure on them, that you are new to the Air Force, and there's a lot of eyes on you that are going to, that are trying to figure out whether or not you're going to be successful in this great adventure we call the United States Air Force. And the vast majority of the times, of course, our lieutenants are successful, and there's many ways to mentor, bring them to. But do you feel that pressure? Is that a real pressure? Was it a real pressure, or am I just?
I would say, as a second lieutenant at Kadena, it was stressful at times, just because there was so much to learn. Because we go to our first base first before going to tech school, so not understanding anything about Air Force logistics was a lot to absorb really quickly, and it was trying to make sure that I understood situations or sounded competent in explaining matters, and then also being able to relate to my airmen and get to know them as a person. So I did feel like there was some pressure, but I would say now, as a first lieutenant, I know more of what is expected of me, and so.
Because I think that's the one of the hard parts is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Airman Jantz, but there is still a baseline level of competence that's needed as well. And so when somebody's brand new to an organization and they don't have the experience to lean on, they're going to have to find ways to find competence in their job. And I think a lot of that can come down to, what can I do as a leader? The things that LT here is talking about, like, how do I bring my team in? How do I foster these ideas? How do I give them the space to grow? And the things that you do figure out, finding a way to get buy-in from your team is really important. It's hard. You're navigating a pretty difficult space.
Yeah, Colonel, just something that popped into my mind is having our leaders, our lieutenants, they don't go to the same tech school as us enlisted. So when they can comprehend what we're doing, what the work is we're doing, the difficulty of it, and they can really be empathetic toward an airman when, gosh, I'm struggling on this, it's really taking some time up. I'm going to be apologetic. I'm sorry it's taking time, but hey, it's super difficult to do this one task. When they can understand that, that's super awesome, and in my experience, we've got a new lieutenant coming in, and he is gonna be back in the pit with us enlisted.
It sounded like a scary place.
The pit is Cubicle City, where us enlisted, the junior enlisted sit, and we've got all our desktops and our laptops, but we're gonna have our second lieutenant come in. And he's going to, he's going to be in the meat of it. He's going to be able to see and hear, all the stuff that goes on back there. He'll be able to witness, wow, okay, Jantz is putting together a podcast. What all is the editing that's going into that? That way, when he does go off to tech school and learns his position and then comes back, he can hopefully understand, okay, these are the products we're putting out. This is what I can expect from my airmen, and I think that's awesome. Set
them up for success. I love it.
Send him this podcast.
Yeah.
Coming to the pit, because pit can be very scary, or it could be a snake pit. Or it can be deep. It can be fun, like Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah.
Chuck E. Cheese pit.
Pilot instructor training pit. There's lots of pits.
Yep.
Plans, intel, tactics.
I think
That's
that's
a good one to go
a
on.
great idea, though. That is something that my senior NCOs did for me when I moved to the fuels management flight. They said, hey, LT, for the next 3 weeks, you're not going to go to any meetings. Don't worry about any of them. We want you to learn what our airmen do. So one whole week, we were doing 12s. So I sat in the truck, and we were doing hot pits. So you sit and you wait for a fighter jet to pull up. You fill them up, and then you just sit out in the hot Okinawan sun all day. And I really got to understand my airmen's perspectives, and then I got to, do every single job in that flight for a couple weeks, and so that was really eye-opening. I got to relate to them, so I actually knew what they did, because the fuels management job is very technical, and then I was able to go to those meetings and say, hey, this is actually, I know actually what I'm talking about.
That's the competence part, and you found a way to build that early. Power of a question. How important is that in the stories that you've told here, LT? I mean, that is a really powerful way to build that competence, build the trust to your team. I think the other part you hit on is admitting when you don't get it right. Like you mentioned that in your earlier story, like they didn't all work out, and I don't know, but what I've learned over time is that teams appreciate that. When, look, it didn't. This part did not go the way we thought it would. We're gonna go back to what works, and having an honest conversation about that too. There's a time for, and Chief and I have talked about this so many times. There's a time for, hey, this sucks, team, But there's always, in my view, the hope. And you always want to give your team hope at the end of that there's a better way to get there, or that we're going to do the way that we've known works. And so I think having some honest conversations with your team is important too. You can't get up there and posture your team to go through a very difficult challenge when you get thrown curveballs that are not fun from the environment or weather, or name your condition. That's what I call the conditions of, hey team, this sucks. We're getting rained on. It's cold, but we're going to figure it out. But I think that's kind of what you're hitting on, a few of those.
Yeah, speaking of weather, your career seems like a lot of rainbows and unicorns so far. Like, you've had a great experience, but I know you've dealt with discipline. I'm certain of it, and we don't like talking about it. But I have to ask, how do you balance accountability with compassion?
I can understand a scenario however, I feel there's standards for a reason, and so it's important that we uphold the standards, so that everyone understands, hey, this is the line, you will not cross it. And I can be compassionate for, okay, it was a mistake and it might not happen again. However, the standard is, we need to hold you accountable. And I am not on G series orders, so I am not actually punishing anyone. It is more of a corrective tool, and LORs, LOCs, they, at the end of the day, they can be pulled out of a PIF, but it's just, I want you to get better. I want you to learn from this situation so that we don't have to have this discussion again.
Okay.
Yeah, I love this, and I think we've hit this on a few different angles from time to time, but I think the standards are what sets us apart. I think our airmen want the standard. I think they want to be held to a higher standard, and being unapologetic about that is perfectly appropriate. And so, to your conversation, those corrective actions to get them back on track, making sure that they understand the reason why. There's the uniform of the United States Air Force means something. We do a mission that involves life and death for our airmen. And so the standards and discipline that we need to do that are absolutely foundational to what we do. And so I think your approach on the standard is where it is. I generally think that resonates. And when folks get sideways with it, there's one or two ways to go. And the vast majority of our folks correct correct the action, and they move on and they're stronger for it. And so it's always, again, this goes back to there's always hope and optimism at the end of most stories, all of them, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's always good to understand where you fall on that spectrum. Like for me, accountability is my thing. So, and usually I balance a boss on that one. And I think it's important, for our young CGOs to recognize where they fall on that spectrum, and do their SEO balance them out when it comes to that. And if not, it's okay for you to tell them, like, hey, I fall in this spectrum. This is where I need you to come with the argument, play devil's advocate to make sure that we're fair and balanced at the end of the day.
So, gentlemen, Lieutenant Rogers, we're wrapping up this episode.
This went fast.
Yeah,
It
this
did.
is new mics, new
Yeah.
Jans, new
Same cup.
Same coffee
Same
cup.
coffee cup, but
same coffee cup.
and the epitome of proficiency here. Efficiency, sorry.
But I've got to ask you, gentlemen, do you have any closing comments?
Chief, anything that you're thinking about as we wrap it up? Like I said, this was a really dynamic. I love the way we're working up the structure, and really unique perspective to have.
Yeah, so I think I told Colonel Baker, and I share with every flight commander, of course, that I have an affinity for CGOs or company grade officers. It's such a unique position where you have to come in with curiosity, humility. You're at a disadvantage when it comes to experience, but it's your shop, and you will fall on the sword if something goes wrong there. You're held accountable for that, and that's such a tremendous opportunity to be in. And there's a lot of factors, and I think it's the crucible of leadership when it comes to those formative years. But I have such an affinity, so we're super proud of you. When we asked who should be the CGO that we interviewed, resoundingly your name was dropped. It was obvious. I mean, not only do you handle business inside the LRS, but I mean, you're handling a lot of big wing projects. And wow, what a diverse path to go from Kadena to here, the amazing patch at Altus, and now you're going to go to jolly old Thule.
Mm-hmm.
We're super proud of you, man.
Yeah, I agree, and it's been a great perspective to get from you. And it is a crucible of leadership, and I think that's a little bit of what we were hitting on there, where you're coming in with low experience but super high relative responsibility, and it's hard to get it exactly right. And from what we've seen and heard, and like Chief said, resoundingly, you're the nomination, and we don't have a super scientific way of picking our lineup who comes in, but each time, and I'm confident that we have got it exactly right, and we crowdsource it a little bit, and then we look for things like who has outsized impact, who is punching beyond their section and making good waves across the wing. And so that's how you got here. You were a household name through many different circles, and I think it was a really successful. I love the shout out for your mom. So to Miss Donna, you said Lieutenant Colonel retired? Colonel retired. Donna.
Let's get it right, sir.
Yeah.
Let's get it right. I did not demote you, Colonel. How cool was that you get to send a little shout out that direction, and clearly prepared you well.
What an honor. I mean, to think that the court of public opinion says this is the person. I mean, that's a pretty amazing send out. Beyond OPRs or award packages, these are the intangible data points that really set you apart when you leave and people actually remember you. It's not because you want to be remembered, because of how you serve your airmen.
I'm very thankful for this opportunity. I always love getting to work on my public speaking skills. I definitely thought it might have been a prank at first when I first received the email.
You got punked? Are we dating ourselves? Is that still a thing? You got punked?
I don't think so.
Yeah, you typically have one last little
Yeah.
question, typically for the...
Nothing to dangle this time, huh?
He's just geeking out over the microphone.
No. But I did want to thank Lieutenant Rogers for coming on out of a very wide pool of awesome CGOs across the space. I mean, you could probably name a number of other CGOs that could come on this podcast, and hey, you're representing, and you represented really well. And we really appreciate you coming on to this podcast. But if nobody else has anything else,
Number
huge thank
5
you
is,
again.
yeah, thank you. I mean, yep, huge.
Because your
thanks.
PCS, I mean, if you don't realize it, you're not just leaving Otuli, you're leaving Otuli this week, or you're leaving the
Next
local
week.
area next week. Okay, so you should have lied.
and
tomorrow.
and that is going to be its own unique experience. We need to have a debrief, 5 years in the future and see how this all went, like a throwback
Follow up.
debrief. So we'll see where everybody is. We'll have a homecoming debrief and
Yes.
try to find Lieutenant.
Lieutenant Rogers, thank you. Safe travels to your next base. And I would call that a wrap
I think it's a wrap
for
Number 5 in the
podcast number 5 in the books. Thank you, command team. Thank you, Lieutenant Rogers. We're wrapping up.